Hey, welcome to the Milwaukee Music Lessons podcast. My name is Alex Bennett. A little different setup today than some of the stuff that we've done in the past. I usually do this with my wife, Robin, and we have the big fancy camera setups, but it has been quite a hot minute and since we've shot a podcast episode, and as of the date of this recording right now, we have a newborn in the house. It's been exactly 1 week since our son was born. And so things are chaos right now. And, there's always a reason not to do something. So I just decided, we got to sit down and we got to have a little powwow, even if it's just you and me. So that's what we're going to do here today. I've had a lot of stuff because it's been so long since we've done a podcast episode. I've had a lot of stuff that's been on my mind that I've been hoping to share. And so today is probably going to be a bit of a long podcast episode just because, I think the topic that I want to cover is going to be pretty lengthy and hopefully worth it. So sit back, enjoy, because you just get me today. So the thing that I want to cover today is I want to talk about how I think of the learning process when it comes to like evaluating students and figuring out what's most important when it comes to like their journey and where it is that they need to go. So I'm going to just kind of briefly explain like the categories and how I think of it. And then I'm going to actually spend some time and go in depth into each category and talk about why each of them is important and why I kind of choose the order that I do. So I like to divide your musicianship, your level, into 5 distinct categories. And those categories are technical ability, your chord knowledge, your rhythm knowledge, your song knowledge, how many like pieces that you know. Then after that, it's music theory. Then after that, it's ear training. And then finally, 5th one, it is creativity. And that can be divided into a few different things, which I'll get into. But those are kind of my 5 categories. And generally speaking, that is, if you're a brand new student, that's usually the order that I try to tackle things in. So technical ability, just to start getting into the individual pieces. Actually, before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about what I would change if I were, dealing with somebody maybe who was not coming in fresh, right? So let's say that you've already been doing this for a little while. That could be anywhere from 3 months to, 10 years, right? However long you've been doing stuff before you come in and enter our studio. I would do the order that I mentioned before if you're brand new, but if you're not brand new, then what we're going to do is we're going to kind of evaluate those 5 things and figure out which ones you're deficient in. So let's say, I'm going to use myself as an example because this is where I was when it came to my skills. When I went to Berkeley, I had a decent technical proficiency. So let's say we're scaling these on like a 10 out of 10, right? 10 being like virtuoso, 1 in like 1,000 type of people, right? Versus like 1 out of 10 being brand new, little to zero experience whatsoever. So I would say when I came in, I was like a 5 out of 10 on the technical aspect. I was like a 4 out of 10 when it came to number of songs and chords and rhythms that I knew. I was like a 4 out of 10 when it came to like the creativity side of things. I'd done a lot of songwriting and a lot of improvisation, but my theory was like a 2 out of 10. I'm probably being generous there. And my ear training was like a 1 out of 10. I had some, like I could do a little bit of stuff with my ears. Like I was pretty good at identifying just when something wasn't right, but I couldn't tell you what anything was before I got there. And of course I didn't have the theory knowledge to even describe what any of that was. And so when I got to Berkeley, I found that the biggest challenge for me was filling in those 2 big gaps. And they were challenging, they were not pleasant for me, and I was not particularly looking forward to them. But as with most things in life, when you find something that's challenging, it usually seems to be the thing that's probably what you need to work on the most. And that ended up definitely, at least in my case, being true, because once I increased those 2 things everything else got exponentially easier, because as the discrepancy between those things becomes wider and wider, the anchor that's weighing you down gets heavier and heavier. That doesn't mean that you can't continue to progress in some of those areas, but it just means that you're going to have to work 10 times harder to continue to get the same kind of progress that you were before. And so it's not uncommon. We like to do things that we're good at. And if you've been doing anything for a moderate amount of time, like, you probably have forgotten some of the initial pains of first learning how to play your first chord, or how to do your first paradiddle, or like learning your first riff, right? And so what can I say? If it's been so long since you've had to deal with those things, your memory is lapsing. Then you forget, like, okay, how much work did I have to put in before it actually became like fun? So I know I certainly have to think about that all the time with students, because I've been playing for 20 years now, and I have to put myself back in that seat and think about it, so that way I can teach properly. But obviously, if you're teaching yourself, you have to do the exact same thing. You have to think like, okay, this sucks, I don't really like it, but then the question is the reason I don't like it because I'm not good at it, or because I'm not interested in it? And then, of course, if your goal is to become a better musician, whatever that might mean, then you have to decide for yourself, like, is this something that ideal me would do? Dream musician, in my case, dream Alex would want to achieve. And if the answer is yes, then you kind of got to go through the motions. And at least what I've found is that for most things, once I get good at them, I start to enjoy them. And so I think if you just come into, like, if you're trying to be well-rounded, which you should try to be well-rounded, at least a certain amount, then it is worth it to go through that pain. Now, really quickly, what I don't want people to think is that everything has to be a perfect symmetrical growth across these 5 categories, right? You don't have to, be a 1 here, and then as soon as you're a 2, then we can get working on the other thing being a 2. That's not what this has to be either, right? Like, you can work your way up to like a 4 in one category and then start working on something else. Like, where you decide to do that is somewhat of a personal preference. And obviously, everybody's personality is different in what they're willing to do and put up with, and things of that nature. And I will even say too that, like, if you spend too much time trying to be perfectly well-rounded, you will also make slower progress as well. Because if, like, most of the time you get really good at something by just going like really hard on one particular thing. And when you finally do that, you see really fast, rapid progress in one area, and then eventually you start to hit a wall, and that's usually when the signal is we need to start working on something else and get working on that category. So obviously, I'm broad stroking a lot of things. Individual people will need individual things, but this is a pretty good rubric and a pretty good template for how you can start to think of it. So again, going back to the 5 categories really quickly: technical ability, then the second one is chord, rhythm, and song knowledge, then the next one is music theory, then ear training, and then finally creativity and ability to improv and creatively write. So now let's start to go into those categories in individual detail, right? So if I go and take a look at, say, technical ability, right? Technical ability just simply means getting your body to be able to do the things that you want it to do. So as a guitar player, that might mean, getting your fingers to touch the right frets and the right strings, making sure that you're not accidentally touching stuff that you don't want to be touching, making sure that your right hand hits the right strings in the right way, with the right intensity, things like that. As a drummer, it might mean, being able to control all of your limbs, whether that's, doing a certain beat or having a certain amount of like stamina, endurance, a level of independence. For vocalists, that can be like being able to control your voice properly, or for piano players, that those fingers, getting those fingers to do the things that you want to do, the patterns, right? Technical ability is just getting your body to cooperate with what your brain is telling it to do. And fixing this is usually pretty simple. A lot of technical ability actually happens almost naturally. But if you are struggling with technical, like if you don't have, say, great dexterity, the way that you get around most things is you create limitations or you work on very, very specific goals. So as a guitar player, I often like to do, I call it the caterpillar exercise. I've heard a lot of people call it the spider exercise, where it's just like one finger going up one fret at a time on a string, and then you continue to do that until you get to the next string, and then after that, you're moving on all the way till you get to the end, the last string, and then you start to do it backwards. And the nice part about that exercise is it has a tendency to reveal some of your weaknesses because you're using every single finger, every single string, and you're going forward and backwards. And so you might find that your pinky has some problems, or you might find that going backwards causes certain problems. And so then when you find those problems, you don't just do the exercise mindlessly, you just work on those specific problems. And that's really, really good for you. So that's technical ability, though. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory, and obviously how you fix individual problems, again, require individual issues. But the point here is to broad stroke and just talk about what do you focus on. So the next one is chord knowledge, song knowledge, and rhythm knowledge. And these are, basically just memorizing different patterns that you've seen before, right? Pattern recognition is really, really important. And in fact, a lot of these next four categories have something to do with pattern recognition, right? But for example, it's way easier if you know how to play a C on a guitar. It's way easier to learn a whole bunch of songs if you can always remember what a C looks like, instead of feeling like you have to go back and relearn it, or feeling like every single song is like a unique problem that has to be solved. The ability to, just recall some of those things inherently and not have to think about them, like to play a song properly requires that a whole bunch of things happen together. And usually the way that you get there is by learning individual components and then slowly but surely sticking them together. It's very rare until you get to the high levels that you're able to just kind of, learn a song in like the first or second take. And usually the reason that you can do that is because you've worked on all the individual components a ton. You've done it a lot. And so for my students, if I'm starting from scratch, I'm first working on just getting your hands, your fingers, your limbs to do what you want them to do. And then second step, now we're here and we're learning like a couple basic, that might be a strum pattern, or that might be a paradiddle, or that might be, it could be all sorts of things, but like just memorizing a few key basics where it's like, you're going to use this a lot. So you might as well memorize it so that way you're being able to recall it, right? And then of course, the more of those repeated patterns that you start to know, then the easier learning songs down the road gets, because you're reusing assets all the time, which is really good. Number 3 is theory. Now, theory, this one is a hot topic issue because there are plenty of people who really don't like the side of theory. And that can be for a lot of reasons. Some people they don't understand it. They don't understand why it's important. They have had bad experiences with teachers who are maybe obsessed with theory because they love it and they want to pass down that knowledge right away to students. And so there's a lot of reasons that people don't enjoy it, right? I used to not like theory because I thought it destroyed creativity. Now, in hindsight, I realize that it's a tool that can be effectively used to create, it gives me resources as opposed to limitations, right? And so, when it comes to theory, like the reason that theory is important is because it's another context piece. I think of it all the time as like the language of music. So if I, for example, asked you to write, to memorize a poem, like maybe it's something really simple, like a haiku, right? A haiku is not that long, and it's only got so many syllables in it by design, and so you should be able to memorize a haiku relatively easy. The problem is, what happens if that haiku is in Japanese? I'm assuming whoever's watching this does not know Japanese fluently. If you do, great. Imagine it's another language then. But imagine I asked you to do it in a language that you weren't familiar with. Now the words don't have meaning. Now they're just sounds. And you've never really heard them before. And so you're just memorizing random sounds to you that have no context, that have no meaning to you in any way, shape, or form. And that's a lot harder to memorize. And the hard part too is that you're not really going to be able to take that information forward and use it in any meaningful way because it just doesn't mean anything to you. Now, there will be some teachers or some people who maybe think that I should put theory higher in the list. And to those people, I would say, well, when you learn a real language, like when you learn English, for example, like I have a 2.5-year-old right now, so we're teaching him English, right? He doesn't know how to read, write, spell. He doesn't know grammatical things, right? We have to teach him individual words, and we have to teach him how to like enunciate certain things. If we do cat, I have to teach him to do ka, at, ta, right? And then you put those things together, and then we look at visuals of a cat. And now when he says cat, he remembers what a cat actually is. And then later I can teach him all the specifics about like when do you use capitalizations and punctuations and all sorts of different things that you would need in a English class or a grammar class, right? So I think there is obviously it's practically useful, but you don't, people get into mechanic stuff because they love cars. They don't become a mechanic and then later learn to love cars. And so I usually start with, let's get you playing, let's get you enjoying your instrument, because it's something you can physically, tangibly see, right? Like people are people. They want results a little bit early. It would be way different like if you were trying to go to the gym and, after your first 2 weeks, you lost like 3-4 pounds. And then after 3 months, it was like, oh my gosh, in 3 months, I lost 20 pounds. It'd be way different psychologically than if you lost 0 pounds and then all of a sudden one day you woke up the next morning and you lost 20 pounds. Like that's a lot harder. The success rate for people will be way, way lower that way. And so, you need to get people like shedding the pounds early on instead of having, starting with the theory first, which, yes, it gives you all the background knowledge, but the playing is what people really want, right? That's the vacation. It's not the travel. It's not the plane flights, right? It's the Maui is what it is. So anyways, I hope I just gave like 4 analogies there. I hope any of one of those stuck. So that's the theory side of things. Next, we've got ear training. And ear training is not to be slept on because your most important tool that you have at your disposal is your ears, right? Our ears are what got us interested into music. It's always about the sound. It's what things sound like. And so as a result, they are our best tool that we have. Now, for most people, they get stuck at the things that happen on the page, or they get stuck looking at their hands. And that is not the end-all be-all. The end-all be-all is what you hear. That's why a lot of times I encourage students to like record themselves playing, go and listen back, right? Because that's actual feedback. That's what things really, really look like on the other side. And that's super, super important. And so ear training is, it can be done in a couple of ways. It's both rhythm and it's also harmony. So, the timing, and then like harmony includes melody and chords, and how all those things stick together. The reason I put it after theory is because usually in order to really memorize like what's happening, you need to have some terms to be able to actually assign them to. And so even though I think the ear is probably one of the best tools you can possibly have, and there are ways of doing some ear training without needing the terms, like you're going to hit a wall relatively quickly. So outside of just like basic pitch recognition or like being able to keep a beat on time, the theory really helps out with some of the other stuff that happens in ear training. And so that's why I put the theory in front of ear training, again, assuming all things are equal. When it comes to ear training, though, there's a couple of different things that I think are super important. One, I don't think of ear training as like perfect pitch. I think of it as like relative pitch. So for all the people who want to learn perfect pitch, there's a whole topic on that. Rick Beato has a couple of really great videos, if you've ever seen his stuff, on perfect pitch and how that works. I'm not going to go all into that right now, but I think good relative pitch and rhythm is really important. And typically, I think people who are good at ear training can do a couple of things. I think one, they know how to hear something and then be able to figure out how to either play it back or write it down on the sheet music. And then the other one too is like being able to see it on the sheet music and then in their head envision what it's supposed to sound like before it actually happens. And so I've had many times with students where they sit and they are really stuck on a piece, and I say, hey, you know what? We're just going to sit and listen to the beat a couple of times, or we're going to sit and listen to the song a few times. And I want you to, like, as you're listening to it, envision what changes are happening where, and let's see whether or not what we're hearing is accurately, like, whether our brain can kind of interpret where things are going to happen on the page. And I've found that, like, there's so many times where the problem isn't that their hands don't know what to do or they're not reading things right on the page. It's just that they just can't envision it before it comes to them. And so that ear, like, when you get really good at the ear training, you can do that all the time, and it allows you to anticipate instead of react. That's a huge bonus, right? So that's where ear training comes in. Now, the last one is creativity. And creativity can be a lot of things, right? It can be just putting your own subtle spin on a song, you know, adding slightly different accents or slightly different variations of chords that are in a song. It can be actual songwriting, building something from the ground up with nothing else. It can also be improvisation. It can be playing with a track and then you being able to riff or create a beat or something like that on top of it without any guide. And the thing about creativity and why it's so important is, if you can think back to when you were really, really young, like grade school, middle school, and your teacher would tell you something, they'd give you a definition of something, and then they would say, I need you to tell it back to me in your own words. The reason they do that is because not only are you proving that you actually understand it, right? You're not just parroting the information back, but you're also actually structurally reorganizing your brain so that you understand the information, but, like, you're proving to yourself that you understand the information well. And improvisation or creativity does exactly that for you in music. You're gonna, if you're playing around with stuff and you had an idea for the way that you thought it would work, and then it doesn't end up working, you're identifying roadblocks that you likely had that you didn't know. And so now you have to work around those roadblocks and figure out, how do I get to the result that I actually wanted to get to? And so I encourage a lot of my students to really do some creativity with their music. Not that they have to all be like professional songwriters or even show to the public what it is that they're doing, right? But it's just proving to myself and them that they actually understand what it is that they're playing, what it is that they're performing. Does the expectation of what you thought it was going to be like in your head match what actually happened in the real world? It's a great feedback. It's honest feedback. And for many people, it's a really tough area to get into because, people are embarrassed. I think when they create, they have this expectation that, like, it's a representation of them and their artistic liberties and things like that. And it's like, well, in the beginning, definitely not, because in the beginning, you had an idea in your head, and what you did with your hands or your limbs didn't match what was in your head, right? Like, you might have had, like, if you're a toddler, you might have had this idea of, like, I want to go there. And, like, it doesn't mean that going to your destination was a bad decision, but if you can't get your legs to keep you balanced and push you forward and hold your weight up, then, the problem isn't the decision to want to go someplace. The problem is that your body can't actually support yet what it is that you want to do. And so you have to train your legs. And, like, again, that's not a representation of you making that bad decision. So you need to train those components so that way the line between what's in your head and what happens with your limbs becomes smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually there's no line at all. I had the pleasure of going and seeing one of my big guitar idols, Guthrie Govan, in person at a workshop one time. And he talked about how he would do these exercises where he would sing and play at the same time. And of course, the goal was for him to sing and play the same thing at the same time. And in this workshop, one of the students had the wherewithal to ask, like, are you singing what you're playing, or are you playing what you're singing? And after sitting and thinking for a second, he said, yes. And so the point was to just to get rid of that, so that way when you have that barrier, so that way when you have that stream of conscious, you're you're able to do it without having any barriers whatsoever. So anyways, those are kind of my 5 big points here. I'm sure this is probably a little bit different than what I usually do with my our podcast episodes, and it might be this way for a while, but I definitely have some ideas for stuff that I want to talk about for sure. Hopefully when Robin's ready and she's come back from maternity leave, we can get some more interactive conversations going. But for a little while, it might just be me rambling at the camera and just kind of sharing with you guys some of my thoughts, my ideas about what I'm thinking about teaching-wise, and what I think is good for the students that we have here. So anyways, thanks so much for joining us. My name is Alex Bennett, and hopefully it will be a much smaller time between now and the next episode of the podcast. I plan on seeing you guys hopefully in the not too distant future. Have a Merry Christmas, guys, and we'll see you later. Bye.